Hello. Now, this is the first video about the good practices of requirements management. Part 1. Now, the first one, establish a change control process. Okay, I mean, change will happen, okay? Let's accept that. What we're trying to do is to be prepared for the change, to avoid chaos. I should also admit that in relatively small settings, like in agile projects, or let's say not necessarily in agile projects, but say small projects where agile practices are employed more frequently, requirements changes are inherently handled by short iterations. Okay, so you have seen this in a previous video, how agile works. In fact, how it happens that how it works or how it handles change is that it divides the requirements into pieces, and for each piece it gets that piece, it freezes that piece, and then it works on it until end, and let the other requirements evolve, and then in the other iteration pick another piece and then freeze it and do the iteration. So that's the kind of trick to control requirements change. Again, the entire agile approaches are in fact meant, or let's say emerged, to manage requirements changes. So it's requirements management, or let's say change control, is extremely important. And how do you handle in large project settings, particularly in waterfall or incremental projects? Again, in fact, essentially at the very beginning we only had the waterfall projects, and it turned out that it is controlling the requirements changes are so difficult that we came up with other type of life cycles to manage the change, and one of them is an incremental. Incremental is also one of them. And finally the agile, that's where we ended up with. But yet we still have to, in many projects in real life settings, you still have to follow waterfall, not have to, but like possible to follow waterfall incremental projects as well, where agile is quite difficult to follow. So in those type of settings, what you need to do is to define a change control process to structurally manage the change. And this process basically defines how the requirements changes are proposed, how they're analyzed, and how they're resolved. We'll get back to this thing. So in fact, all these good practices are also somehow related to this one, establish a change control process. I mean, the things that will be mentioned are all parts of this change control process, like performing an impact analysis on changes. So impact analysis is an important element of the change process itself, as I just mentioned. Here we are trying to evaluate each proposed change in order to assess the effect it will have on the project. So you identify the tasks required to implement the change and estimate the effort needed to perform those tasks. Otherwise, I mean, you will not be able to control your project. You can't just say yes or no to a change request without knowing how much it would cost to you, how much effort it would involve. So that you will receive a lot of change requests from several reasons. I mean, you don't have to receive one. It happens that you have to change your requirements, and by the time you have to perform some impact analysis to understand how much it would cost you, how much person months it would cost you, so that you have an idea about it. And one of the things that would definitely help is the requirements traceability metrics that we will be also discussing about. The third good practice, is establishing baselines and control versions. So what is a baseline? I already mentioned in the first videos of the series introduction. I thought about baselining. So a baseline simply defines a set of agreed upon requirements, typically for a specific release or iteration. After requirements have been baselined, change should be made only through the project's change control process. So basically you initiate or you start these change control, that change control process after you baseline your requirements. As I mentioned at that in the previous video, so you do all these elicitation analysis and specification. At some point in time you say, okay, for this set of requirements I baseline them. From then on I need to control the changes to this baseline set of requirements. That's a good practice. Otherwise, again, it will lead to a chaotic situation, and the project will be longer, it will cost much more, and so on and so forth. The fourth one that we have somehow mentioned about it several times, in fact. Oh, sorry, this is not traceability, this is track requirement status. Sorry, that comes later on. Track requirement status. What you do, particularly if you have quite a number of requirements, it's a good idea to track the status of the requirements, not necessarily like the entire set, but even individual requirement status can be tracked. There are obviously you need to use some tools for that, by the way. Again, this is for lot settings, okay? So there are some key attributes that are more or less define the object of a requirement. Date of creation, current version number of that particular statements that we're talking about, or let's say a higher level statement. Priority, obviously, we have seen that they have to, requirement statements have to be prioritized, remember. The status, what type of status, like is it a proposed status, approved status, implemented, verified? I'll come to that in the next slide. Origin, source of the requirement. If you kind of define the source of the requirement for each requirement statement, then you will automatically create a kind of traceability. So that is the attribute that will help you to handle traceability. Release iteration number to which the requirements are allocated, so you can say that this is for version 1, this is for version 1.2, and so on. Stakeholder to contact to make decisions about the proposed changes, so you may as well say that, okay, this requirement is coming from this stakeholder, and if something goes wrong with this one, or if there's a question, you go back and ask to that particular stakeholder. Validation method or acceptance criteria, that's something, but I must add that, if you just start maintaining too many attributes, then it will definitely overwhelm the entire project team. Okay, so you do not gold plate, do not just, we're trying to just do something here, do not overdo it. Fine, that's my message here. Again, if you're producing air traffic control system, yes, do that. But if you're trying to come up with a mobile application, that could be that would be a little bit of overkill. Okay. Of course, what do they, storing and tracking statistics information about the requirement status gives some options for us, gives some opportunities for us, like monitoring the number of requirements in each status category at any point in time, provides insight into overall project status. So we can have a kind of very good idea about how many of the requirements are stable, how many of them are kind of defined, validated, verified, implemented, and so on. Speaking of which, so there is, for instance, this is kind of a graph that shows a typical graph that you would see in a project throughout the project, or in a single iteration of a project. So, and this side we have the percentage of requirements, the number of requirements, and at this in the x-axis, in the horizontal axis, we have the time in months in this case, but it can be anything. And in fact, this part shows the status, the valid status of requirements. So it can be proposed, and from proposed it can only be deleted or approved, and then if it is approved it can be implemented or verified. It's not the entire but anyway, just these are kind of the simplified version of the status. The question is essentially that I ask usually sometimes, when we're in this classroom environment, we discuss about this. But what I would ask you to do right now is to pause this video and indicate the type of, let's say, lines here in the graph, and map the, let's say, lines to this to the statuses indicated here. Okay, so which line is mapped to which status? Good. Understood? Pause, and yeah, if you have already done, then this is the answer. I'll not go into the details of this figure, but basically it starts from the proposed, the status, and at the end it just basically do not have any proposed, because they are either implemented or verified or deleted. That's also the case. So it starts with the proposed. Then we have a lot of approved ones because we have approved them, I mean, or the users approve them. And then once we have the approved, the deleted ones obviously also appear, or those that are that we start implementing them, we start verifying them, and so on, and it goes like that. At the end, we want all these requirements to be verified, obviously. Good. So basically that was the first part about good practice of requirements management, and that will be the next one, talking about the rest of the good practices. See you there.